Focus, a weekly program about important issues and events in the two Virginias.
Good morning and welcome to this edition of In Focus. I'm your host, Melinda Zosh. A shooting in Boulder, Colorado on Monday, March 22nd claimed the lives of 10 people. They ranged in age from 10 to 65 years old. This morning, we have experts who will be joining us to talk about what you should do if you're ever in an active shooting situation. But first, here are images of the victims. Denny Strong, he was a 20-year-old grocery store worker. 61-year-old Kevin Mahoney, he was a soon-to-be grandfather. Also, Ricky Olds, a 25-year-old front-end manager at the grocery store King Soopers there in Boulder. 59-year-old Suzanne Fountain, she was a financial counselor in the healthcare industry. Also 49-year-old Trelona Bartkawak, also known as Lona, and 62-year-old Lynn Murray. Terry Leaker was a 51-year-old who had worked at the grocery store for about 3 decades. And 65-year-old Jody Waters worked in the fashion industry in Boulder. So what should you do if you're ever in an active shooter situation? There's a national training program called ALICE. We're going to go in depth about that program today, as this could help you or your friends or colleagues survive an unthinkable situation. Joining me right now via Zoom from Tampa, Florida is Navigate 360 CEO JP Gilbo, and also Chad Cunningham will be joining us a bit later. He's a national ALICE trainer with more than 23 years of law enforcement experience. JP, though, I'll start with you first. What is Navigate 360 and how is it connected to the ALICE training program?
Yeah, Navigate 360 through technology, education, and services provides a complete portfolio of wellness, intervention, and mental health education, as well as safety and threat assessment solutions for schools and workplaces. One of those solutions is ALICE training, an active shooter program that is option-based, and it's a response design program to teach and empower leaders to train their classrooms, their businesses, and their communities on how to respond in a violent critical incident such as an active shooter in the workplace or in the school.
And JP, ALICE is an acronym. Can you break down what it actually stands for, what each letter stands for?
Sure. It is an acronym that helps with memory recall. It stands for alert, lockdown, inform, counter, and evacuate.
And what types of businesses, groups, law enforcement agencies does this ALICE training program work with?
We work with really all types of businesses, schools from K-12 to higher ed, law enforcement agencies, organizations in healthcare, as well as places of worship. Through our train the trainer model, ALICE has prepared almost 20 million people in the United States. We work with these law enforcement agencies, school districts, businesses, really across the country. We'll do it through trainers. We educate and help businesses put experts in to train their organizations, as well as go on site to do our own individual training for them. We have a number of prevention solutions that not only train you for the situation, but also help you identify the signs and ensure that people get help before committing an act of violence.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the signs as well. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? What are some of the signs that people should be looking out for?
Yeah, I think the signs and really the ideation that takes place in a person's mind to commit a violent act can start occurring very, very early or long before the event ever takes place. And some things that you want to be aware of are, things that might be out of the norm for the individual, out of the norm for the setting or surrounding. For example, you might see somebody in a building in a very warm place, but yet in clothing that doesn't represent the temperature. We saw this in a Texas shooting a couple of years ago, where the individual was standing during the service against a wall in a long trench coat, and you can start to pick up on signs. But beyond that, there are signs of mental health and social stressors that people start to exhibit. As you think about the individual in Colorado, it's well documented. There were signs just 3 years before, as he was graduating high school, and that could alert or were known to a potential risk.
And JP, why is active shooter training so important, and how does it make a difference when it comes to survival in an unthinkable situation like an active shooter coming in somewhere?
Yeah, I think it's so important today. Violent incidents and suicidal ideation are on the rise. In our recent study, we see parents and students, 61% talk about their concern for their physical and emotional safety now more than ever. And they're worrying about it more than they were just 6 months ago. And so as a society, the stress leads us to be less productive. And one way to think about how to move past your fear or your anxiety is knowing what to do, when and how to do it. And that increases, not only your level of comfort or knowing how to respond, but it increases your chances of survival. It's critical that everyone from law enforcement professionals to security officers and teachers be on the same page when it comes to responding to a critical incident. This is why it's so important to think about standardization, the way you communicate, the way you inform. And as experts in the security field, we all know how important the minutes are between the active shooter's first shot and the time that law enforcement is going to arrive. And that's what we do at Alice. We are training people and empowering people with the skills and the knowledge to survive those 2 to 3 minutes between when that first shot goes off and when help is going to arrive.
So tell us more about what people should do between those crucial minutes then, like a couple minutes before law enforcement arrives, the shooter first enters into a building, facility, you name it. What should people be doing in those first couple seconds even?
Well, unfortunately, if you're not trained or if you haven't processed your first steps or response, a lot of us will just freeze. And so this is why training becomes critically important. And so recognizing that a situation is occurring, this is our first kind of core component to the acronym, alert. Being able to be alert and aware and identify that the situation is taking place is critical. And the speed at which you can make that assessment that your life is in danger is so pivotal to what might happen. And as you think about those moments, as we did in Colorado, there were people within 6 feet, 10 feet of an armed assailant that was about to take their life. You have to know how to respond with options to create distraction, to create confusion, and to be able to get yourself into a place of safety, either by getting out, if you can safely do that, or locking down in a place by which no one can get to.
And JP, how can businesses or companies get involved with Alice?
Yeah, we encourage businesses and organizations to get involved and partner with organizations like Navigate 360 and Alice, but also their law enforcement community. Alice uses a train-the-trainer model. We have trained a number of businesses and security professionals by which they can go back and train their organization. For viewers who want to become a certified Alice trainer, we list all of our upcoming classes on our website, as well as offer virtual e-learning options. Additionally, I would encourage, because of how much presence and work we do with law enforcement officials, contact the local law enforcement agency and see whether it's something they may be offering as trainings as well. More information can always be found at www.alicetraining.com.
All right, thank you, JP. And do you have any concluding thoughts, anything else that you feel like would be of relevance to our viewers this morning?
Yeah, I think, just concluding thoughts, while active shooter training is incredibly important and can save lives, we must also not forget that many of these incidents are preventable. We know that many of these shooters displayed warning signs for years and never got the help that they needed. Mental health should be part of the current conversation so people are not afraid to ask for help. And additionally, before an event like this happens, businesses and schools should have a plan in place. Current floor plans should be digitized, they should be shared with local law enforcement agencies, and people should be trained on what to do, how to do it, and know how to inform and communicate during an event that's taken place. We can't allow ourselves to be complacent any longer when incidents of violence occur. We have to take the steps to prevent them and know how to respond when something happens.
All right, JP Gilbo, CEO of Navigate 365. Thank you, or 360, excuse me. Thank you for joining us this morning from Tampa. Stay with us. We have much more to talk about coming up right after this break. Good morning and welcome back to this edition of In Focus. I'm your host, Melinda Zosh. This morning, we've been talking about active shooter training in light of the shooting that happened on Monday in Boulder, Colorado. We just heard from Navigate 360 CEO JP Gilbo on what you can do if you're in a situation, an active shooter situation. Joining us now is Chad Cunningham. He's a national ALICE trainer with more than 23 years of law enforcement experience as well. He joins us from Richfield, Ohio. So Chad, can you explain the ALICE protocol and how it's different from other types of active shooter trainings?
Well, thank you for having me on. And really, ALICE is an acronym that teaches 5 different strategies for an individual to be able to increase their survivability and mitigate casualties. These strategies are the alert, lockdown, inform, counter, and evacuate. These strategies can be delivered in any order. It's not dependent on, it's really, the concept of the strategies are dependent on your location and situation and when that violent critical incident is happening. Our ALICE is designed to empower individuals to participate in their own survival. Our program discusses the understanding and being aware of your surroundings and having situational awareness. Recognizing and responding to the alert is very, very important. And really, as we look at responding to the alert and understanding what's going on in our environment around us, allows us to respond and have an option-based strategy approach, whether we would lock down if we're by an area or in a room that has a lock that we can enhance that lock by adding a barricade to it. Do we evacuate based on our situation and location, or do we have to do something to disrupt the attacker from being making that decision to use that weapon appropriately to buy us time? And really, when we look at the ALICE program, we look at these strategies from an environment of what options do we have during this event, and option-based strategies to perform, because there's really no one-size-fits-all strategy. It's all based on situation and what's going on during the time of the event.
Right, and I know in the last segment, JP mentioned like creating distractions. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, if that's appropriate in that situation? What can people do if there are things around them, like maybe throw things at the shooter? What should they do to create a distraction if that's appropriate?
Well, distraction can be defined as anything that can really disrupt the decision-making process of the attacker. So we use a term called OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act. And this is just a decision-making process that came out of Lieutenant Colonel Boyd. Military used it on how to disrupt somebody's thought process. And if you can put a stimulus before the action step of that decision-making process, then they have to start all over in that process, which provides time. So the science and kind of the math there provides us a little bit of time. And in order to perform those strategies of distraction, it can be anything. It can be anything within your environment that you can use, whether it's a chair, a pencil. Noise can be a distraction. Movement is actually a distraction. So anything that takes them off of their script or what they're planning on doing and disrupting that decision-making process is a distraction to buy time in order to do another strategy, or provide distance to evacuate. So anything that's in your area can be used, as far as, again, it can be books, it can be anything that disrupts his ability to make that decision.
And Chad, in Boulder, people they were out shopping on Monday, and they probably never expected that a shooter would enter a grocery store. You would think that you'd be safe if you're just out looking for your groceries for the day. So what do you recommend in a situation like this where people have very little time to prepare for a shooter situation, physically, mentally, or otherwise?
Right, and really just like any emergency, natural or man-made, you never have time to plan and prepare during the event. The planning and preparation comes prior to the event. It comes within the training. And part of that planning and preparation is the training, learning skills and techniques that provides option-based strategies to increase your level of competency and understanding on how to respond. When we go out of our house into our communities, we should always have a situational awareness of what's going on around us. We know what's going on inside our house, but as we exit our house and we go into, whether it's a school, a business, a new place that you're visiting, the grocery store, place of worship, we should always be aware of what's our environment, where's our exits, who's there, does something seem out of place just because of our normal interactions within that area. I'm sure a lot of them have gone to that grocery store before, but really looking at what's the environment feeling like. So using our senses again to have that situation awareness and know what's going on. And then if you hear something or have that alert, that alert is always that first strategy that we hear, whether it's gunfire, people screaming. Sometimes you'll have that feeling that there's something not right. To really take that seriously and then allow the training that you received and put it into action. If you're by a room that has a door and a lock with it, use the lock and barricade it. Enhance that lock with a barricade. Quickly, that could be an option. If you're near one of those exits that within your situational awareness planning, you saw there was an exit nearby, or you know that there's an exit through the back produce area or behind the meat counter, then jump that meat counter and go out of that exit. Get away if you have that time and distance away from that attacker. And if you come face to face with that attacker because you could not, find a place to secure it or evacuate, then use whatever you can to distract that thought process and overwhelm that decision-making opportunity that he has, and buy yourself some time to do one of the other strategies, whether to get away or continue distracting until you can find that time to get away.
Yeah, and Chad, you kind of just touched on this, but should people actively be fighting, like what you mentioned with the distractions, or hiding somewhere? I know you said it depends on like what's around you, being aware of your exits, and if you can hide or barricade yourself. But can you elaborate a little bit more on the importance of making that, I guess, a split-second decision of what you should do?
Absolutely, and at no time should we ever go out trying to look for the fight with the attacker. We don't teach anyone to fight. Our program is about options that are based on each individual choice within the organization. As we look at that, those options are really based on what's going on around us. We don't teach people to fight. The strategies follow basically is a lockdown, evacuate, or counter. We would like people to evacuate away. You should never actively look for the attacker, but if by choice or chance we come in contact with that attacker, we need to have a strategy and know what to do, and that is distracting them, disrupting their ability and their decision-making process to buy us time to move forward. If we have time and distance from the attacker, I'm going to want to evacuate. If I have a room that I can use to secure and barricade to prevent him, right, from coming into that room, I want to do that. Those are the strategies I want to do first, but I still have to have a strategy just in case I don't have those available to me.
All right, we do have to take a quick break. We have much more to talk about. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this. Good morning and welcome back to this edition of In Focus. This morning we're talking about what to do if you ever find yourself or if a loved one finds themselves in an active shooter situation. And I'd like to bring back in Chad Cunningham. He's a national ALICE trainer and he has more than 2 decades of law enforcement experience. And Chad, as a former law enforcement official and ALICE trainer, do you have any anecdotes of people surviving active shooter situations? It seems like very few people go through that experience. So hearing from those who did is crucial, and perhaps their stories can help our viewers try to understand what that situation's like.
Sure. We hear different stories, and one story that always comes to mind when asked is really about Stephen Weiss, who was at the Tree of Life synagogue shooting. And he tells his story of when he hears the shots being fired, he was an avid hunter. He knows what the sounds of gunshots should sound like, but it didn't sound like it that day. And when the sounds went off, he did what a normal reaction might have been, is to hide in those pews, to duck and cover, so to speak, that single strategy defense that we've been taught a long time. But then he talks about, and he looks at, as I was sitting there, I started thinking to myself of the training that I went through, and he actually went through the Alice training, option-based training of Alice, and he said, in my training, I learned that if I sit here, I'm in more danger if I just do nothing. And he said, I remember that I looked up and I knew where the exit was from the podium of the stage of the synagogue. And he said, I jumped up, I jumped over some pews, jumped into the top of the stage and went out the back door and got away. He goes, and if I didn't have that training, I would have sat there and I would have been that easy target for that attacker. And those, it just goes back to what I was saying before of having a plan and an understanding what strategies and planning you have in place, and knowing how you're going to respond by those types of events. Because when the event happens, you go back to your training. We fall back to what training we have and what we've talked through or gone through. And even when you look at another one at Springfield Mall in 2018, here is a teacher who was at the mall with her two sons. They heard the shots being fired. She recalled the training that she received from her work at the school district on how to respond to an active shooter situation. And that training, those strategies kicked in immediately. She actually ended up evacuating out. She knew where the exits were, was able to evacuate her and her two sons. She remained calm, which in turn helped the boys remain calm. And she talks about that she knew what to do and she understood what to do based on the training she provided, and then the drills and items that happened at the school district. So hearing these stories is great because, again, when the situation happens, being aware of your surroundings, knowing what's going on, having that plan in place of what we're going to do, having those strategies can provide that positive outcomes. And even looking at, when we look in Ohio at the West Liberty Salem School shooting, one of the comments that came out of the authorities spoke about the attack, saying we were busy getting help there to them and trying to keep them calm, but we didn't have to give that much direction because they all had Alice training and the staff and students were empowered and were able to keep calm and barricade or evacuate the area. So having these options and having this training really provided that ability for them to make their own decisions, empower them to have those decisions because they knew what to do and they knew how to fall back on their training.
Yeah, it sounds like the training can make all the difference. And Chad, our viewing area encompasses southern West Virginia and some of southern Virginia. Do you have any tips for people who live in this area? And we do have a high amount of people here who do have concealed carry and they carry weapons on them. Any tips for people specifically in this region?
Well, I think it's really tips for everybody. Anytime we go out and about it is to be aware of your surroundings. And these are tips that I teach all the time in female self-defense, but it's really in any type of occasion. We should always have situational awareness, know what's going on around you, have those areas. And really sometimes the stressors of the pandemic are intense. People are experiencing depression, anxiety, and a host of other emotions that can be challenging to manage and really understanding. But we really know how to observe people. And if you see that there's something wrong or you have that feeling from that situation awareness that, the hair on the back of your neck stands up, they hear it, women's intuition, those are all real things. That's your body saying, there's something wrong with this environment. There's something wrong going on here. Just like the alert, take the heed on that. Start looking, why am I feeling this way? What's going on? How can I make that distance, tell somebody of authority, and really look at it? And those behaviors are a lot of everything that we can look at. Is it, we see physical fighting in behaviors. Do we see just how somebody is looking, where everybody else is making eye contact, and all of a sudden this person looks away when they make quick eye contact with you? Research does show us that, criminals don't like large groups, and they don't like you to be able to look at them because they think you can identify them. So having that situation, knowing what's going on, and if I have that situation awareness, I can remove myself from that situation before anything happens instead of having to respond in that situation. And that's really what we want to happen, is being able to back out of that situation without any injuries.
All right, we have just over a minute left. Quickly, Chad, any lasting advice you could give for someone out there who's watching this right now?
Absolutely. And really, as we look at this, have a plan, practice your plan, and know what your plan is. Prepare, these plans prepare you to respond in many different emergency situations and instances. The program of Alice and any option-based program, our program, are strategies that teach you how to respond when a certain event happens. It does not matter if that event happens at work, school, the mall, grocery stores, places of worship. These are life lesson strategies that you can use anywhere that you go within your environment. The location will just influence maybe what strategy you will use, but the location doesn't influence what you can do. So these strategies you can take with you at all times, but have that plan in place, discuss it with family and friends and colleagues on what is our plan. So if an event does happen, an emergency event happens, your response goes back to your training, and you can respond quicker, more efficient, and increase your survivability.
That can make all the difference. We've run out of time. Chad, thank you so much for joining us, and I want to thank all of our viewers for watching this morning. We hope we provided some crucial information for you. Have a great day. We'll see you again next Sunday.